Get yourself in the lotus position, because I've got no plan, no pretense, and definitely no bypassing. I'm Josh Connolly, and this will probably be dysfunctional. All right, you lovely lot. We're going in today. Man, I feel buoyed by some of the discussions and conversations that I've been having. So this podcast has always been about that in my mind. It's always been a space and an opportunity for me to really pull some of these difficult subjects apart. And that's what I plan and intend to do today. Now, I don't know if any of you've seen the Gary Stevenson debate on the Steven Bartlett podcast. I think it came out last week. I watched it on the way home from Newcastle. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. I watched it on the way in from Newcastle. So it came out like Thursday last week. I really implore you to go and check that. Gary Stevenson is... He's like a multi-millionaire trader, but he's very much an exception to the rule. He's a working class man, or he was a working class kid who was a bit of a genius, or not a bit of, very much a genius in maths. And as a result of that, he got out of the system and went on to be like a multi-millionaire trader. But he sort of recognizes that he's an exception to the rule. And he knows a lot about the economy, and he talks very much. And I've been a big fan of his channel, Gary's Economics, for a while. He's got a best-selling book that's out now. I don't remember what it's called if I tell you the truth, but like he very much believes that the system is rigged against us and it's only going to get worse, and that we need to start calling out the system. And it's a notion that I've been talking about for years now. You know, if you listen to old 115 Mile episodes that I used to do with Hass, you'll see me talking consistently about how we're all fighting amongst each other, when actually the system is the issue, and we need to look at the system, and we need to look at the people in power, and that the systems are now designed to keep the powerful in power, to help them to hold on to power. And they use these little examples of people breaking free from that as examples of why the system isn't that bad. And I want to get into a little bit of that as well. And as a result of that, you know, like I sort of operate in the sort of well-being space. So I talk a lot about what we now frame as mental health, which I actually think in most cases is actually just distress as a reaction to the system. And I did a post yesterday, I think, where I talked explicitly and said, like, you know, people often say we need to find out more, and we're still trying to research, and we're trying to find out what causes depression. Like, it's clear what causes depression. It's like so clear. Like, of course, there are lots of different factors. There are genetic factors and stuff like that. But we say that smoking causes lung cancer. Nobody has a problem in saying that smoking causes lung cancer. Yet it's around 15 to 20% of people that smoke get lung cancer. But we're happy calling it lung cancer. So actually, when you look at like things like poverty, social classes, racism, bullying, trauma, all of these things, the only clear link that science can be clear on is that if you grow up with any of those things within your life, you are way, way, way more likely to get depression. So go and look it up. And again, we can cite and go, well, yeah, but what about these people that didn't grow up with any of those things? Listen, I think in many cases, they need to look at their childhoods clearer, and to just see where trauma being, it's not what happened to me, it's what happened as a result of me. It's what happened inside of me as a result of the things that happened to me. That's a Gabon Mate quote, right? The reason that people will say that they never experienced those things, I always talk about how, like, I grew up in an alcoholic home when I was very young. It's quite obvious when you look at my childhood that you go, yeah, that you would have experienced difficulty as that. But I think it's a lot harder for a lot of people to pick up on it. You know, when like parents stay together when they shouldn't, and they really don't love each other, but neither of them separate, and like, or when you grow up with kind of like dysfunction that all goes on under the carpet, so it looks good on the outside. You went on family holidays, maybe you just lived with a parent that had work addiction, so like you always had, materialistically, you had everything, but one of the parents was never present, and the other parent was sort of lost and felt alone as a result of that, and so you picked up on all of that when you were younger. So like, I think that and that wouldn't, you would look at those scenarios quite often and say, well, there's no obvious trauma. There's no reason why any of those things that I talked about, trauma, bullying, or emotional, immature parents and all of that stuff. Like, if you don't have obvious traumatic moments in your childhood, it becomes a lot more tricky. Now, the flip side of that and the variables of that, when I look at my own family system that I was born in, I'm highly sensitive, right? So you could argue that there are genetic factors of that, and I probably would argue that there are genetic factors of that. And so, look, if you look for one particular cause, you're always going to end up falling short. However, it's the same with lung cancer, right? What is it about the 10, 15, 20% of people that end up with lung cancer as a result of smoking? I'm sure there's genetic factors in that as well. But we also go, well, look, many of those 10 to 20% wouldn't have got fucking lung cancer perhaps as early as they did if they didn't smoke. We know that. And so, I think this is true when we're talking about people's internal distress and people's struggles that we now frame as mental health problems. I don't like to frame them as that. And so then the people in power, they push for you to be the problem. They don't look at the system. They don't look at the system. And the reason they don't look at the system is because if they looked at the system, then they would realize that what we're dealing with is a social issue. So the solution is a social one. It's to adequately fund children. It's adequately fund the people that support children, to give them better support, right? So they don't end up with distress as a result of who they are, coupled with the experiences that they have. And so what happens is that the people in power, they tell us that our suffering is a chemical imbalance. They push for that, right? The chemical imbalance theory has been completely demystified. We now know that it was basically made up. It was essentially a marketing campaign, though they'll never fully admit that. They'll always still say that there's chemical things going on. And of course there are chemical reactions going on in the brain when you experience depression, but that gives us nothing of course. And so I wanted to just make a note of ways that I think that the system gaslights us. So when I say the system, let me just get clear on this, right? When I'm talking about the system, what I'm talking about is you have people in power at the top. So that's not just government, right? The people in power at the top is bigger than that now, right? And they all sit, there's like the pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, the government. Then like now you're seeing like these kind of tech companies like Amazon who have the monopoly over everything, right? And if you don't think that they're not all sat at the top table, speaking, canoodling and together, then I think you're naive. Maybe not naive. What you are is you're part of a system where if you look at that, it makes you feel hopeless. So you'd rather not look at that and rather always convince yourself that there's always a chance that you could break free from the system, which there is, but it's a very minimal chance of most people who grew up in most environments, working class environments. And now we're moving towards that being the case for middle class environments as well. Like you will be an exception to the rule if you break free from that. And so when you understand that they're all sat and their job, the ones in government and all the others. And by the way, if you go, but you can't, like, how the government like fully canoodling with other people. Rishi Sunak has just gone into the top 100 richest people in our country straight after leaving power. Go and have a look at past, if you're in America, presidents, but in England, go and look at past prime ministers, check their wealth before they became prime minister, and then check their wealth after they became prime minister. Look at how they acclaimed their wealth, and then look at the policies that they pushed when they were in. Another really good example of this is Nick Clegg. When Nick Clegg was in, you might remember him, he was part of the coalition, so he was in with the Tories, and it was David Cameron at the time, so they were supposed to be working together. Was it David Cameron? Well, either way, it was with the Tories, but Nick Clegg was in power. When Nick Clegg left power, when he left the office, he's now one of the highest people up in Meta. And if you look at the policy which he pushed through and supported getting through when he was in government, it had a lot to do with fucking Meta. So these are not coincidences, and it's not that they all sit around the table and say, how do we hold on to power? Not necessarily anyway. It's more about the ways that they give their donations. So one of the ways that I believe they gaslight us is that when they talk about how how mental health is a individualistic issue. And so you can see how science, which is funded a lot by pharmaceutical companies, right? You can see that pharmaceutical companies are going to push for a certain outcome when it comes to medication and when it comes to the things that are being researched, right? It's well within their benefit to make sure that we do get this down, that we get distress to be a chemical issue, that we focus on that, because if we focus on that, then they can keep profiting from the medicalization of it, right? And so then you can see how they might sit with the government, and the government go, well, let's make up a really oversimplified example, but you've got the government sat here, you've got pharmaceutical companies sat here, and then the scientist comes in to pitch to them Dragon's Den style, and he says, well, yeah, we've done that research that you asked for us to do on depression. And they go, all right, what's your finding? And they go, well, it's sort of inconclusive, really. I mean, like, there are changes of chemicals in the brain, but there's no solid proof of that. And you can see that the government and the pharmaceutical companies are going to be like, well, I thought you said there was. I thought you found something. They're like, yeah, but it's sort of so small that it's inconclusive. And they go, well, what have you found? And they go, well, the only clear thing that science can clearly say is the fact is that if you grow up with racism, bullying, dysfunction, any of that stuff, that's clear that plays a huge role in whether you go on to have things like depression and stuff like that. So then the pharmaceutical company looks at the government and goes, well, that's that means that you've got to fund it. And the government's like, well, we don't want to fucking fund it. And then so the pharmaceutical company goes, well, we don't really want to lose all the business that we get from it being a chemical imbalance. So the scientist goes, well, that's science. And they go, all right. Between us, we're just going to remind you where your funding comes from. And if you want to continue to research this, I suggest you double down on looking for a chemical imbalance. Now, that's an oversimplified version, and there'll be people listening to us going, science doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that, and they're not all funded by pharmaceutical companies, and of course they're not. But that oversimplified thing gives you an idea of how the system at the top can work. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the system. The system is designed not to help you get towards your own sense of power. The system is designed by the people that hold the power to be able to hold on and grow their power. That is what it is like by design. Working class people are told to work harder and not question inequality. So when you look at the massive growing inequality that's happening, particularly, by the way, since COVID, it's got even worse. There was a massive transfer of wealth. Go and check that out, because you'll find it. There was the biggest ever transfer of wealth from the middle class up until that sort of top 1%. And so when you get, and I want to talk about, because Simon Squibb, who I'll talk about in a second, did a reaction video to Gary Stevenson, sort of calling him out and saying it's ridiculous. But when you've got a lot of people now that are going, you can be anything that you want to be. It's never been easier to become what you want to be. You can start a thing with your laptop, and all of that stuff is true, but like, it's not true for everybody, is it? Like, you can't just say that a nurse. So if there's a family where one of the parents is a nurse and the other one works at a manufacturing company or works at, say, fucking Royal Mail, yeah, you got two people there who both work in jobs that are needed, that people need to do, but they're living in fucking relative poverty. Now, some people will go, yeah, but just become an entrepreneur then. Not everyone's going to do that. And fucking, like, good job they're not going to do that. It's a fucking good job that nurses don't go, right, well, let's all just pack up our bags and, like, find our way out of the system by becoming entrepreneurs. Like, the world doesn't work like that. Now, some of them would argue that the more entrepreneurs you get, the more they make money, the more they stimulate and give that. But that's just not happening, is it? It's fucking never happened. People growing up with trauma are told to move on instead of being supported to heal. So, like, you're told to sort of, like, we've all had difficult childhoods, and if you're suffering, then the problem must lay within you. Again, this is gaslighting. And it's very similar to what I talk about with toxic parents, right? You only get one mum and dad. It's very similar. People will say you only get one system. And the hard truths are, what I've said is that the systems are built to protect power, not people. if the system was working, we wouldn't see all the issues that we have, right? I believe the struggles that we see in people and the growing struggles, the growing suicides, the growing struggles in people, what we now call mental health problems, right? All of that shows that the system is not working, right? However, we can't admit that, because if the system admits that, then it's down to people in power to do something about it. And at the moment, they profit and medicalize off of the system not working. Yeah? So you can see why they're not going to do it unless we do it. And so before I come back to it, to talking about why we should believe that we can change the system, when Gary Stevenson done this video, Simon Squibb did a reaction video that came out on LinkedIn like a day or two after it. Now, if you don't know who Simon Squibb is, you've probably seen him online. He's doing really, really well, actually. He does a lot of like going out and giving people money to start up their own business, and like he's really big on saying you can be anything that you want to be. It's quite inspiring, actually. And again, look, I don't dislike him. In fact, I quite like what he's doing. I even pitched my idea of my community space to his doorbell. So he does this thing where you go to his doorbell and you can pitch an idea and he'll give you money, and he'll invest in you. So I did that. I mean, I never heard back from it, but I don't dislike what he's doing. But the fact that he believes that you should stop trying to tax the rich and you should stop, because Gary Stevenson said, it's sick. I'm sick and tired of people saying that if you want to live a better life, if you want to make it, anyone can do it. You've just got to get out of the system. You've just got to find something you love, chase your dreams and become an entrepreneur. And Gary Stevenson is like, I'm sick of hearing it, because he's right. It's just like saying to somebody that's in an abusive relationship, you just need to fucking leave. You just need to get out. It doesn't work like that. Here's how abuse works. Some of the main ingredients that you need for abuse. One of the things that people will do in an abusive relationship is try to set the relationship up so that the victim relies on them entirely, right? Both believes that they should rely on them entirely, but does start to rely on them entirely, whether that's financial or emotional and all that kind of stuff. So they'll manipulate you into believing that, right? So that you rely on them, so that you think that you can't break free from the system, that you can't break free from the abusive relationship, that they're the source of truth and that you need to stay with them, right? And then they rely on that fucking you believing that you can't change it, so you have to stay. They also then rely on trust, so they rely on you trusting on them and trusting that they have your best intentions at heart. And then they also rely on separating you and ostracizing you from your friends. So the people that support you, they want you to fight amongst yourselves with each other in that, right? So when you understand that, you can see that that's what's going on with the system. So what happens is you have somebody like Simon Squibb who reacts to the abusive system by, he does well, right? He breaks free from the system. He does amazing. And he's like, it's really clear that he's broke free, and it's like, everybody should celebrate that, right? But then he goes back and just says, well, look, I'm proof that the system isn't that bad, and if you work hard enough, you can break free from it. But of course, that's not actually true for everybody, right? And the abuser, so the system at the top, then gets to look and go, well, look, he fucking did it. So it shows that it can't be us because he did it, right? And then you have somebody like Gary Stevenson, who's more of the scapegoat, and he comes out and says, look, I mean, the fucking system's fucked. The system's rigged against you. And then he will be scapegoated. People will make him out to be a little bit crazy. When he gets emotional about it, because nobody's listening to him and he can see it so clearly, when he gets emotional about it, people will say he's too emotional, he's a little bit crazy, and like, can you really trust him and listen to him? So you have to kind of understand what we're talking about here, the levels that we're talking about here. And this is why what you have is a dysfunctional system. I lost my trail of thought slightly there. You have a dysfunctional system, right? So you have Simon Squibb then arguing, because he was quite angry with Gary Stevenson, rather than going, well, look, I did break free, but I also recognize that many people don't and many people won't. And how do we create a system where everybody does have truly equal opportunities, right? How do we create a system? And by the way, I sort of understand how capitalism works. If you work really hard and you do really well, you're clever, or I fucking don't know the wording I'm trying to use, but you do what Simon Squibb does, right? It's not necessarily bad for everybody, But what's happening is the people that also work hard but in a different way, so like nurses, are finding themselves with their families living in relative poverty. That is not what needs, that's not okay. That's not fair, right? I understand some people will do better financially in life. The system will always have a level of that to it. I'm not a socialist. I don't believe that we should all have equal everything no matter what, right? I don't believe that either. But I also don't believe that that families that work really, really hard, and like Gary Stevenson was saying on the podcast, he said it fucking regularly, and it's true, right? What you think that these working families that are living in relative poverty and are given fucking nothing throughout their whole life, right? What you think they just need to try harder or learn entrepreneurial skills? That's fucking ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Now, just to try and be as balanced as I can, the counter argument of that is, well, they'll say, well, look, if we make more entrepreneurs, we'll stimulate the economy and give them better jobs, and then there'll be more money in the country. I probably don't know enough to have a proper opinion on that. But what I would say is that when I talked about this online, particularly when I talked about the fact that the system is broken and that you don't have a mental health problem, you have a perfectly good reaction to the broken system. The system is the problem. A lot of people, good, well-meaning people that follow me, said, yeah, but you can't change society, so all you can do is change yourself. That's not true. And it's a bit like saying, well, you only get one mum and dad, right? It's just like, you've got to make the best of it, right? Again, that's not true. Abuse relies on that. Abuse relies on your belief that you can't change it. And that's why we have to challenge the system. And I want to give you some examples. I want to give you, by the way, let me just be really clear on that before I give you some examples throughout history. These are well-meaning people, but you can see how we get caught in this loop when we believe that there can't be another way, when we believe that there can't be another system, when we believe all of that stuff, right? We're telling people that you must stay in abuse because there's no other better way, and you must make the best of your abusive relationship, which is what people tell people to do with kids, right? They say, you only get one mum and dad, and so you can't pick your parents, and so you've just got to make the best of the abusive system that you live in, and that's not true. So here's some examples of people overturning rigged systems. Now, I don't claim to be a historian, but I've just done a bit of research to find some of them. So the civil rights movement in the 1950s to the 60s in the USA, a community of oppressed people told to accept their place in society, resisted through protests, boycotts, and sit-ins. Legislation was forced to change, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. The lesson from this one is that change happens when people refuse to stay silent and they organize. The fall of the apartheid in South Africa, mass movement led by black South Africans against white minority rule. International pressure and decades of resistance equaled in the system being collapsed. So persistent unified resistance works even against deeply embedded power, right? In both of these, so when you look at the apartheid, right, how many people were saying to them, you'll never change the system, it's rigged against you, you just can't change it, right? How many of them were just basically saying, stay in the abuse and work on yourself and make the best of it you can? The suffragettes, I talk about these all the time. Women were told that politics wasn't for them. They disrupted, protested, got arrested, and changed the game. We now take women's voting for granted, right? So what seems radical becomes the norm tomorrow. So when we say, people were probably saying to the suffragettes at the time, what are you doing? You'll never change this, right? You don't have a place in politics. You'll never change this. You shouldn't stand up. When they stood up and fought, people said, look at these fucking hysterical women, right? Look, it's cute. They think they can change the system. It's ridiculous. And yet here we are today. We take women's vote for granted. Do we take it for granted? But the women get the vote. People don't even realize that how hard it was fought for and how originally those people were told you'll never change the system. The Arab Spring in 2010s, spontaneous uprisings across country when people had enough showed how quickly pressure can build and crack authoritarian systems. So I don't really know much about that one. But the suffragettes is the one that I use because I sort of know a bit more about it. But, and you see, right, and you can understand the change that was created. How many of those people were told, you don't be silly, made to feel like they were crazy, you'll never change the system, you just have to change yourself. Telling them, you'll never have the vote, but just do the best you can. Try and make impact in another way. And this is what Gary Stevenson's saying. He's saying we've got to fight it, and we fucking might lose. But just because it's hard, you can't not do it. And if we don't fight back against the system, and I feel buoyed by him, and I want to talk about it in the way that we can. So what do we do now? Well, look, firstly, I think we need to challenge that narrative in the way that we're doing here, right? We need to go, when people say you can't change the system, it's a learned sense of helplessness. Now, you'll have people that do it through a learned sense of helplessness, like I can never create the change, I'll never change the system, you'll never change society. Good, well-meaning people get lost in that hopelessness and despair. Okay? There are other people as well who only care about themselves. So they don't care about the system. I'll sort my fucking self out, right? I don't want to be that person. I want to be somebody who says, no, let's challenge the whole construct of everything. And when we say you can't change the system will always stay the same, we just make abuse easy for people in the same way that we make abuse easy for toxic parents. When we just say you only get one mum and dad, when you say you can't change the system, you make it easy for the system and the abusive people at the top. So how do we challenge the system today? So I have made a list of things. Now look, I'm not suggesting I have the answers here, fucking not by any stretch. But I do want to talk about a few of the things that I believe that we can do. One is to build community. So we need to do that online and offline. So we need to do that in person and online. If you look over the last 20 to 30 years, community in the way that we always knew it has been ripped away. It's really well and truly been ripped away. There are new communities forming and evolving, but we need to really work hard on that. Remember, an abusive system wants you isolated, right? So when you're isolated, you can't come together and you can't challenge the narrative. So we need to come together more. And healing is political. Talking, listening, supporting each other equals resistance. Let me be really clear about this, because there's a slightly narcissistic nature in the healing sort of space that you should just run off and look after yourself. If you don't at least have an eye on politics, then you're not healing. Or you might be at the beginning stages of your healing. But once you've done a bit of work on yourself and you start to have your sense of autonomy, healing happens in community. It happens with people. And you have to start to look at collective healing. If you're not looking at collective healing, maybe you're early in your journey, or if you feel like you're quite far along in your journey and you're not looking at collective healing, which means looking at politics to some degree, then you're a fucking fraud. Like, am I being too harsh when I say that? I just think there's this, like, let's run away and look after ourselves, right? That's not what healing is. If you heal, you start to realize that you're part of something bigger, that you need to try and create some meaningful change in the world. Now, we'll all have different ways of doing it. So if you believe that, you're going to go over and we're going to heal over here, but if you're not then going back and looking at this stuff, it's a problem, man. It's a problem, and there's almost sort of narcissistic nature sometimes in the healing space. And it is a narcissistic nature that's like, I'm just going to fucking heal myself. And I don't get involved in politics because I operate on a higher plane. If you think that you operate on a higher plane than the people at the bottom of the pile, you know who fucking really is affected by politics? People at the bottom of the pile. Me, back in the day, and my mum went on to remarry, so we then sort of lived a more of a stable life. But when my mum was a single mum and my dad was an alcoholic who was in fucking jail, I tell you who was affected by politics. We were, as a family. And so if you think you operate on a higher plane than something that affects people so badly like that, right, then you're a fucking fraud if you think you're healing. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. We all need to look at this. And you can say that I'm angry and you can say that, I'm being crazy and stuff like that. But I believe this to be true. The people at the bottom of the system, the people at the bottom of the pile are affected most by politics. Those and the ones in power, because the ones in power are affected by the fact that they get to hold on to the power. And if you sort of get to float along in the middle somewhere and you're doing all right, then you're fucking doing all right. And you're ignoring all those people down there. And I hear it all the time, you know, I don't get involved in politics because I sort of operate on a higher plane. Then who the fuck are you? And are you really healing? Are you really healing or are you hiding? That's what I would ask. The second thing we can do is call out systemic gaslighting. Start naming what's happening. When people are criminalized for being poor, when therapy is treated like a cure for poverty, and when we pathologize what is actually a natural response to trauma, we need to call that out. I'm not doing down therapy, right, when I say that. But when we're just saying, well, you know, let's get therapy, that's how we solve the issue. The issue is fucking poverty in a lot of cases. And most of those people can't afford therapy anyway. So it doesn't work in that respect. And therapy is becoming like this kind of like middle class thing anyway, of like, yeah, I'm just working on myself, you know, I've got a bit of spare extra income to spare and I'm using it to work on myself. You know, you don't have to be like desperate to go to therapy, and that's great, and I agree with that, it's brilliant as well. But what about the fucking nurse who is now a single parent, who's got kids at home and don't have a spare penny to turn the fucking heating on, let alone go and get therapy? Therapy's not their solution. Their solution is a fairer society that supports people like that are working class, that should have a right to be able to live a comfortable life because they work fucking hard and they give to society through the work that they do and the way that they support their family. But we're all over here like, you know, therapy's for everyone, and, you know, let's work on it. You know, I'm just working on some things. Great. I think that's great. I think you should do that if you have spare income. Brilliant. But don't pretend this ain't happening over here. And don't pretend that therapy is the solution to that mum or dad who's a single parent now and is a nurse. Don't pretend that therapy is the solution to them, because they could go to therapy every fucking day, even if you give it to them for free, but they can't turn the heating on at night and they're worried about paying the bills. Therapy doesn't solve that problem. Therapy doesn't solve that problem. Therapy doesn't solve that problem. And fucking nor does medication, by the way. And if we now live in a society where we go, yeah, but medication can help her get through it, then we're just giving more profit to the people that are causing the fucking issue anyway. And you can see I'm getting angry about it. I'm passionate about it. Use platforms to disrupt the narrative. I've got a growing platform. I intend to use this platform, and I intend to use it to speak what I believe to be truth. And let me be honest with you. COVID happened 5 years ago. That sort of changed the way that I worked as a business in terms of the corporate work that I did. And I got a little bit lost in the dream of like, I'm going to run off into the sunset with loads of money. That's what I thought, if I'm being truthful with you. And I can't do that. I don't want to do that. When I look at like the people that I get to support in my life today, fucking good people who have had hard lives, who didn't have it easy when they were kids and don't have it easy when they're adults, and they're fucking doing their best. And they deserve more. They deserve more. And I would sit and hang out with them every single day of the week over any fucking people from the other end of the system. I fucking would. And to be honest with you, I've sat with both nowadays. I would. And there's more community down there when they need it and they have to do it. I want to go back there, man. And that's what I want to do. Then we organize and pressure those in power. People say the government won't change, but when you thought, and I've done stuff. I did the walk, right, and it was designed to do what it did. The government want to keep power. If you've all come together and don't let them keep power, they'll have to give something back. When we make noise, when it feels like they're losing grip, and we talk loud enough and we uprise in that way, that's how you create change. You can't give up hope. And then remember that the system wants you tired, distracted, and hopeless. That's not a personal weakness. If you feel tired, distracted, and hopeless in this society, that is not a personal weakness. That is an outcome of the fucking system and the way that it's designed. So we have to support each other. We have to find ways to come back together. We have to get rid of our differences. We have to stop looking at like how do I make you be better for me, and how do I make you be better for me? And we go, how the fuck do we get them to start working for us again? And I know you might be still listening and thinking it sounds great to say it, but it's unrealistic. But what else? What other choice do we have? Rest is rebellion. I've written joy is rebellion, and connection is rebellion. When we rest, we rebel against the systems and we call them out together, and we do that in community with one another, and we come together. There's joy in that. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to close on this. Do we continue to try and force ourselves to fit into a broken system? Do we work hard against the odds to try and break free from the system? You could do either of them, and you might succeed in either of them too. Or do we rebel? Do we rebel? Do we stand up and say, you know what, let's fucking start calling abuse what it is. Let's start calling the system what it is. And let's see if we can change. Let's see if we can make some meaningful change. I'm buoyed by Gary Stevenson's attitude. And I believe that change is possible. I believe that change is possible on an individual level because I'm an example of that. But I have to believe that community and societal change is possible too. I refuse to be hopeless, and I refuse to tell everybody that's a victim of this system that you can't change it, so you've just got to accept it. I won't do that to individuals that grow up with toxic parents, and I won't do it to individuals that grow up in a toxic system. We take a breath. I'm going to do one more. In case you've never heard it before, I'm Josh Connolly, and this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.